All right, well, welcome back to the Plato Sophist Book Club. Today we're going to be going over sections 250A to 259E. Um, we ended off last time on the section about Parmenides, the friends of the forms, and the materialists, and how to get out of this puzzle that is being. And instantaneously, at 250, we get the visitor proposing a puzzle for us in which he asks if both change and rest are things that are completely contrary to each other. And that's instantaneously agreed to. Um, but in saying that they're contrary to each other, we're already implying that both of them are. They both equally are, and each of them equally is. And in admitting that they exist, um, we're not actually admitting that both of them change or both of them are at rest either. Um, we're just admitting that there is a third thing that's alongside of them that encompasses both of them, which is what we've been talking about the entire dialogue, that which is. And that which is going to be conceived as this third thing alongside these two. So that which isn't necessarily change or rest, it's something different from them. And now it must be shown that what is not changing doesn't necessarily need to be resting, and what is not resting doesn't necessarily need to be changing. In addition, we also somehow must show that that which is falls outside the two. Um, so what happens after this little sequence at 250 is that we're now in both equally confused about that which is and that which is not. The entire dialogue we've been confused about that which is not. But now, with this little puzzle, we are now just as confused about being itself. So the visitor is going to begin our reading today by asking Theaetetus to note that there are things that we call by different names. A man has different qualities. For example, he can be good, he can be X shape, Y size, have Z qualities or W virtues. We can call a man one thing by a million different names and make him many. So there are these kinds of people that Plato calls the late learners, and they hate this sort of thing. They think that only the good is good and only man is man, and to say man is good would be absurd. But there's an issue there, and that issue is that we are denying predication and we're only allowing for identity claims. Um, what does that mean? Plato was gonna try and explore these kind of questions in today. So there's three options to go about that little puzzle about change, rest, and that which is. So we can refuse to apply these forms to each other, and these forms can be unblending and capable of having a share of each other. We can take these things together and treat them as capable of association with each other completely, or we can take some things and say that some can associate while other things can't associate with each other. So a sort of half kind of blending. Um, and the visitor and Theaetetus are going to go through these options one by one to find the optimal answer. Um, for the first one, it seems that an entire epistemology and ontology of any party looking for a philosophy would be destroyed if being couldn't blend with anything. Everyone applies being in some way, whether it's the being of one, being of many, being of change, being of rest. Um, everyone would be talking nonsense if there was no sort of form blending. Now, what about the people who say that everything blends with everything? Um, and we admit that we would then have to say that change and rest actually belong to each other. This would mean that change would be completely at rest and rest would always be changing. But that's a contradictory statement, so we have to rule out that option as well. Um, so because everything is willing to blend and nothing is willing to blend are two contradicting cases, some things are willing to blend and some things are not willing to blend is the next option that we need to explore. This third option um, seems to be correct at first glance, and we compare them like letters of the alphabet. Vowels, for example, link and connect letters together, and without these vowels, other letters don't really fit together too well. Um, and this is just an example. Remember, this was written in ancient Greek. Had a much different um, language than we do today. But basically, the way it's explained is that it takes an expert in grammar to correctly associate in letters. Analogously, it takes an expert in music to find the correct fit of high and low notes. Um, and we find something similar in any kind of expertise, a correct kind of association. Um, so when it comes to these great kinds that we're talking about, same, different, change, rest, and what is, it takes a special kind of correct expertise to figure out the way they fit together. The person who can figure this out has this sort of knowledge within these kinds of discussions. He must know what kinds can run through everything and what kinds can't mix. He makes kinds capable of blending. He creates specific divisions and knows what must stay whole. This kind of knowledge is actually dubbed the most important kind of knowledge in Plato's epistemology. He says it's the kind of knowledge that free people have, and he attributes this skill to the philosopher. However, we're noted that this is the Sophist dialogue. We weren't looking for the philosopher, um, but the philosopher seems to have this expertise in dialectic. Um, he can divide things by kind in a specific way that he doesn't think that the same form is a different one or a different form is the same one. He can adequately discriminate a single form spread through many things. He can also discriminate forms that are different from each other but have a shared form beyond them. He'll be able to find a single form connected as a unit through many wholes. Um, and this expert also must be someone pure of heart, pure of soul, who has a just and fair love for wisdom. And that kind of seems like the visitor himself that we've been talking about these last few weeks. This visitor, he has such a fair and just love of wisdom that he had to commit a metaphorical parricide. He had to basically kill the philosophy of Father Parmenides. Um, now, what we're also told is that we're always going to find the philosopher if we look for him in this sort of way. However, he's also hard to see, just like the sophist, in a different way. While the sophist runs off into darkness, the dark of that which is not, um, the philosopher is hard to see because the area is actually so bright and divine, right? The sophist operates in the shadows. He talks about things that are not. He's not trying to get to knowledge. He's trying to be perceived as knowledgeable. However, why the philosopher is hard to see is because people need to train their eyes to understand, since the philosopher uses reasoning to stay near the form of being. So far, about halfway into our reading, what has been agreed is that some kinds associate while others don't. Some associate to a great extent, some to a small extent, and some to every extent. And we're going to specifically look at the important forms today because we don't want to get too confused, is what the visitor tells us. We have to see if that which is not is really that which is not, or it's something other than that which is. So we find out that both rest and change cannot blend with each other. We've agreed to that. However, both rest and change do blend with that which is. But we do admit, also, on top of this, is that rest is the same as itself and change is the same as itself. On top of that, that which is also the same as itself. What do these relations mean? What are we talking about here? Because we also admit that rest is different than change and that which is. Change is different than rest, and that which is different than the other two. But didn't we just add two new forms accidentally? Didn't we just add the same and the different? Um, we certainly would admit that change and rest are not different or the same, because in either case, rest would change and change would rest. Rest comes to be different and change comes to be the same. It would make change or rest contrary to its own nature if they were the same or they were not different. Um, so analogously to what we just admitted to, both change and rest do share in the form of the same, in the form of the different, but they are not themselves the form of the same or the form of the different. Um, so it's clear that we must add the same as an addition to the other three forms. However, the different is a bit trickier. For example, that which is can be said alone. The form of change can be said alone. Um, however, both change. Sorry, the different is always said in relation to something else. So Plato is here introducing a new kind of predication to us. And I'll get into that here momentarily. But that wouldn't be that way if that which is and the different were completely distinct. Now, may it be that the different may share in both kinds the same way that that which is does? Seemingly not. It turns out that that which is different definitely has to be what is, or what it is from something that's different. Basically, you can't just say you're different without saying you're different from X. You always have to be different from something. Something can't be different without being different from something else. So we've established that fifth form, the different. This form is said to pervade every other form. Every other form is different from the other four, so all other forms have to actually share in the different. So let's recap here one more time. Um, Change is completely different from rest. Change is not rest, but change is. Change is because it shares in that which is. Change is different from the same, so change is not the same, since being the same would be contrary to the nature of change. But change is still sharing in the same, since we said everything is the same as itself. So now it must be agreed that change is the same and not the same. How can we agree to that? When it is the same in relation to itself. When it is not the same, it is because of its association with the different in relation to other things. When change is associated with the different, it becomes not the same but different. Change is different from different as well, just as it is other than the same and rest. But it is not different in a way, since it is changing. So we get one more time. Change is different from that which is. Change is both something that is not, since it is different than that which is, and change is also a thing that is, since it partakes in that which is. So in the case of change, it must be possible for that which is not to be. What did I just say? It must be possible for that which is not to be. This is because that nature of the different that we were just talking about. The difference makes each form not be, and it does so by making it different from that which is. All forms, everything that we've been talking about, the rest, the same, the different, and the change, are not in the same way that we just showed, since they are different from that which is. But we're also right if we call all of those forms that which is, as opposed to that which is not, since they do share in that which is. So change necessitates difference, but difference does not necessitate change. For example, I can be different from my brother without changing, but I am different from myself 1 year ago since I have changed. With this logic, that which is can be not. That which is can be that which is not in a different way. Depends on which angle we're looking at it from. And it also not the others, which are indefinite in number. So this leads Plato through the visitor to conclude that that which is not isn't actually something that's opposite to that which is. It's only something that's different to it. Something not large doesn't actually indicate something small. It is not as if we're actually indicating something equal or something small, however. It just means that something is other than large. We actually don't have the capacity when we say something not large to say that it does mean one or the other, right? Either small or equal. Negation or the word not doesn't actually indicate a contrary. Not and non as prefixes only mean something.
Wait, I'm confused. How does that which is intersect with that which is not?
Um, one more time. My mic cut out.
Oh, how does that which is intersect with that which is not?
Because that which is not isn't actually non-existence. It's difference. In this, so basically, when I say like, Peter, you exist, right?
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're you partake in that which is. Um,
Yeah.
I also, in the same way, it partake in that which is correct.
Yeah.
But is Ori Peter?
No.
So Ori
Different
is not
people.
Peter, and Peter is not Ori. I partake in that which is not by not being you.
But I thought that was what you said before with things being different. Wait, hold on. Wait, sorry. Backtrack. Are all these things forms? Because you keep seeing like using the word form. I assume change and rest are forms.
They're
Is that
forms
which
in a
is and
different
that which is
way
not?
than what you don't bring the pre supposition of Platonic forms. Yeah, they are forms, but Plato now refers to them as kinds. But here, basically, to go on with what Plato's saying, what might clear it up is that um, negation, for example, only means something other than the names or the things that the names follow. So when I say the not large, it means something other than large. When I say the not Peter, I mean something other than Peter. When I say not that which is, I mean something different from the object that is. And you are an object that is. Um,
Okay. So then would that which is not just mean like different? It just means like
exactly.
different things.
Exactly. So that which is not and the different seem to be the exact same thing. And I'll go over that in more depth here in a moment. But the way that Plato's explaining it to us is that the nature of the different is a lot like knowledge. It's kind of chopped up in pieces, right? Knowledge is one thing, but we always refer to knowledge as knowledge of something. There's many different kinds of it. The same thing happens to the different. Even though it is one thing, it's always different from something. It's marked up into pieces. Take the different that is marked up against the beautiful. We call this the not beautiful. And this is different than the nature of the beautiful. But the way that Plato is explaining to us, possibly metaphorically, is that we're now setting a being over against another being. So the not beautiful doesn't exist any more, any less than the beautiful itself. They're just two separate entities. They're two different things. One doesn't exist any more than the other, even though one shares in what is and one shares in what is not. They both still share in what is in the same amount. Because we're adding on predication purposes. Um, so it seems like we've just shown that that which is not is only the different setting itself against that which is, and even then it still is. The not just and the just both are. The large and the not large both are. The x and the not x are both being in the same way. Um, and when one sets the nature of the different against the nature of that which is, um, that which is not comes out. So when you mix that which is and and then the different together, that's when you get that which is not. Um, so that which is not is shown to be not the opposite of that which is, but only something other than it. The form of that which is not still is, since it is a combination of two different forms, the form of that which is and the form of the different. Something that is a not being is still being. Um, if we kind of place a singular there, right? So we seem to completely gone far beyond that Parmenidean prohibition that we've been talking about. Um, we've not only shown that those which are not are, but we have also showed how it comes to be through the combination of the different and of what is. Um, so in a similar way, the different is this sort of pervading entity, right? It pervades all forms and that which is considered a form itself. then that which is different then that which is seems to also be different from all that exists. What the hell does that mean? One more time. All things share in that which is, and that which is still different from all the others, so we can peacefully say that which is only one, like Parmenides taught us, still exists in a different way than how he taught us. It sounds very incoherent. What it means to say is that identity-wise, that which is different than everything else. However, we predicate everything else with that which is. Peter, you are being. Peter, you are being. You were predicating Peter with that which is. But we also would deny the identity claim that Peter is that which is. So Plato's kind of showing us there are these two separate things. Because if we were attempting to dissociate each thing from everything else, we would actually destroy everything there is to say. The weaving together of forms is kind of what makes speech possible for us. Now that's just going to be my little synopsis of everything that we read today, but I can go over it really step by step now. But before I do you guys have any kind of burning questions? Because I know that one was pretty hazy, pretty blurry, and just kind of quick, right?
I think I got it down. Wait, so everything's that which is not, no? Like as long as there's multiple things, then everything is within that which is not.
Yep, and everything is also within that which is.
Well, but I thought you said there's change, like there's stuff that's like not all change is that which is, no?
No,
I
everything
have a I
must
have
be
a
that which is, because if we didn't
I have a diagram
commit
if you want to check.
if we didn't commit ourselves to that which is not, um, or if we did not commit ourselves to the existence of that which is not within that which is, then difference would not exist. Um, if difference was not that which is not, or that which is. Yes. If difference was not that which
What?
is, then we could not ever um, create that which is not. That which is not is just the combination of that which is um, and the different. It's
Okay.
like an equation of sorts. So we started off right with the first confusion of motion and rest, right? Motion and rest each are, they equally exist. However, each is exclusive of the other. Um, and we realize that there's this third thing, being, which is neither of the two, but somehow encompasses both. And that's going to introduce negative predication. We can say that something is not without implying that it's the opposite. Being is not motion, and it's not rest, but it somehow still is, right? Um, this kind of sets up the groundwork for that later analysis of falsehood, since false statements actually do rely on that negative predication, and this is a sort of preliminary training exercise that forces us to see being as something overarching and independent from more simpler binaries like change and rest. Um, but there's also that problem of predication that we went over, those late learners who deny that one thing can be many or that man can be good. Um, now, that's crazy because denying predication amounts to denying that kinds can interact. Without predication, language and thought collapse into self-identity statements. Man is man, good is good. The refusal to admit that one thing can be many makes language impossible and forbids all
What's
combination.
what's predication?
Um, it's a form of a predication is adding on a sort of property onto something. Um, an example of predication is when I say Peter is smart. I'm predicating Peter with um, the word smart, whatever you choose for that to mean.
Oh, like literally the predicate of a sentence is like
Yes,
predication.
yes.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
right? If motion and rest had no share in being, they wouldn't exist. And if motion and rest couldn't be instantiated as predicates, then there would be no moving or resting things, no cosmos. S
Wait, I'm confused. Sorry, wait. Now you're saying, wait, if motion and rest didn't share in being,
yes. Now remember, in the very beginning,
they do share in being?
they do share in being, remember? So motion and rest both equally exist. However, each is exclusive of the other. Motion is not rest, rest is not motion. But we realize that
Okay.
there's a third thing that somehow encompasses both. Right? Being is neither motion nor rest in virtue of its own nature. Um, but
Okay, but
being
you
is
would say that both
encompassing
motion and rest are encompassed by
are
that which
encompass.
is?
Yes.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
so that's how we get to that idea, right? If motion and rest didn't share in being, they wouldn't exist, right? We wouldn't be able to refer, and we wouldn't even be able to instantiate them as predicates. There would be no moving or resting things, no cosmos. Um, and so we have those three options for how we can communicate or blend these sorts of kinds, right? These forms. We could either not blend them at all, which would totally destroy logos, speech, and everything. We could completely blend them, but that would collapse differences. Rest would move and motion would rest. Or we could have a sort of selective blending, right? That's what I was saying earlier, that only some forms mix and others don't. So
Are are all that which is everything within that which is either change or rest? Or is there things that are that which is that aren't change or rest?
everything that is either at change or at rest.
Okay, so I gotta fix this. Okay. Thank you.
Um, Now where was I? So we analogize the this sort of selective blending with grammar and music, right? Vowels can blend consonants and allows for some sounds to combine harmoniously while others clash, right? Only the expert knows how to correctly combine things. And this is where we're going to introduce Plato's network of forms, where controlled and rule governed, non arbitrary combination preserves both unity and difference. So we're introducing ourselves to the five great kinds: to being, 1, motion, 2, rest, 3, same, 4, and the different, 5. Um, so we're going to start again with sameness and difference. The same is that which something is to itself. Um, and the different is that which something is to something else. Difference is always relational. It's what we call per aliud predication. There's two kinds of predications. We have per se predication, true in virtue of itself. Largeness is large in virtue of it being largeness. And then there's per aliud predication, which is true by reference to something else or different from X, right? So motion is the same as itself per se, but different from rest per aliud. This double predication clarifies how something can be itself while also distinguished from other forms. That's how things can be and can be that which is not at the same time. Um, and Plato, we see, is transforming this older static theory of forms into this dynamic relational network where forms interweave without totally fusing with each other, right? So we're redefining that which is not um, to difference rather than absolute negation. And that's where that not large example came in. The not large doesn't necessarily mean small, it doesn't necessarily mean equal. It simply means different from large, something other than something that is large. Now, the key logical move here is that not being isn't negating existence absolutely, but only indicates that relational differentiation. To say x is not y is to attribute to x the difference from y, not to assert a contrary. So how do we apply these to the forms? Motion is not rest, right? Motion is different from rest. Or to use one of our interlocutors, Theaetetus is not flying. Theaetetus is different from a flying thing. So that's using that per aliud logic that we were just talking about. That not being is always being other than. The different is actually what makes this possible. Um, so Plato is explaining to us why these statements are, some of them are denials of identity, um, and why some of them are negation of predication. Um, not all, or sorry, all is not statements, I mean, ultimately rely on attributing difference, which depends on the relational nature of the different, of the Greek heteron. Um, so we're kind of vindicating not being here, because not being is now no longer non-existence. It's not an absolute void, but it's that which is not becomes difference instantiated in relational predication, which opens up the door for false speech and false belief. To say X is not Y is to represent X as different from Y, allowing for misrepresentation. And this is going to get us into the next section next week, right, where um, discourse becomes the weaving of kinds together. Speech and thought actually depend on combining and separating forms correctly. Because if we were to associate each thing from everything else, like we said earlier, we would completely destroy language. But remember, we said that only the philosopher knows how to weave forms skillfully, which is exactly why logos and reasoned discourse make philosophy possible. Um, However, there is a tension for elitism here, that only a true dialectician can engage in meaningful discourse. However, this elitism seems to be Plato's way of safeguarding philosophy from sophistic confusion. Um, is there anything that we need to go over anymore?
Um,
Anything that you
makes sense. I'm like everything is that which is not.
and
That's fair,
everything?
right? And then, but then is everything a form?
No, no, no. It's not a form in which you're thinking. It's a sort of it's a kind. Um, the form is not the same things as the forms from Plato's middle period. We left that in the dust. Um,
Joke's on you. I haven't read I haven't read his middle period, so I don't. I yeah.
the middle period is kind of like stuff in the Republic.
Okay.
So when you think of forms, you're thinking of stuff from the Republic, from the Phaedo, from the Symposium. Um, but right now we just established those five great kinds. And everything does participate in that which is, and everything also participates in the different. Everything also participates in the same, and everything will either participate in change or in rest.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I just I don't see the point. Like, I see the picture. I just don't see like what the point is.
It does seem pretty odd, especially if you coming into this from the middle, because before um, he wrote this, I mean, it was very accepted to be either a materialist or an idealist, um, or to say everything is just change, like Heraclitus, or everything is just stability, like Parmenides. So right now he's making an account um, for the combination of all of that. He's not saying that the people who say everything is changing are any less right or any less wrong than the people who say everything is constantly stable, because they're both right in a way. Um, the only thing they were wrong about is denying the other. Um,
Okay. Is he just changing the definition? Because I don't know how you could say everything has changed and then like look around and see things that are not moving.
no,
Because that is like what he's using, no?
he's not changing. the definition, he's more so saying that that which is encompasses both change and rest. And change is also always going to be the same as itself. Rest is always going to be the same as itself. Everything that is will always be the same as itself. So we're introducing this kind called the same, um, as something that's known as a great kind. Then also the different. Everything will always be different than something else, right? Or everything will always be different than that which is, to be, as blunt as possible. However, it still does exist, so it still participates in that which is. We're kind of showing that there's a difference between predication and identity. Um, we don't identify Peter with that which is, but we still predicate him with that which is.
Yeah, that
Um,
that makes sense. Like I'm part of that which is, even though I'm not defined as that which is, because I'm not like the whole thing.
exactly.
If that, but I just I like, how does this threaten the materialist or like the idealist worldview?
Because the idealist says that that which is constantly stable and unchanging. The materialist would kind of say the opposite, that everything is constantly changing, never at rest. Plato's showing that that's not exactly the case. Um, that would get into last week's a bit too much, and I'll send you last week's lecture. It'll be uploaded to the channel pretty soon, but I'll go ahead and send you it. Um,
Okay, hold on, I'm confused. How does a materialist say everything's changing? Because they just believe that there's nothing but the material world. They're just
right.
denying like
And the
Cartesian
material world
dualism.
isn't stable, right? It's constantly in flux in the exact same way. Isn't that what you just told me? You said just looking around, you can say that things are changing. The
Yeah, but
materialist,
you can also see like a house that's not moving. Like the house is not. The house is like clearly at rest. Like I'm looking at it. It's not moving.
it's not moving
So
in your
like,
perception. The materialist would say that it is moving when it's on Earth. The Earth is moving. It's still in motion in some sort of way. The atoms, the deeper you go, you can still find a way to say it's at motion.
okay, but that's just this like gets into like the definitions of like rest, and because we only define motion and rest as a reference of like how we're looking at it. Like yeah, like the earth is moving from the reference of like the universe. But from like the reference of me as a person on the earth, it looks like it's standing still. How does I guess my question is, what's the definition that Plato is using of
For
rest and change?
um, I mean, I would assume they're ordinary understandings, right? Like if we don't use the ordinary understanding, it becomes even harder to figure out. And we have to completely agree. In the very beginning of the dialogue, we said that if we don't completely agree on something, then we're not going to move on from it, right? So they ended up agreeing that everything that is either changing or at rest. They just kind of labeled those as categories for that which is. Um, if you split something in two, it's either one or not one, right? Um, you could do that with any kind of splitting, for any sort of category, right? If you take the category of phones, you can either say either iPhone or not iPhone. That's kind of the way that they split up change and rest. They said that we don't necessarily need to define them because that would take way, 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 way too long, to define them, and we're just kind of using them
Okay.
as examples.
Is there what's an example of something at rest? Just like things that don't look like they're moving? Would that be the
It's less about perception, more so about their definition and how they're referred to. Um, that which is at rest, so it'll always be that which is. Um, like something that is the same as itself, never changes, or else it would one day not be the same as itself, right?
Yeah,
So it's always in
that
relation
makes
to
sense.
something that's at rest. Um,
In
remember this is
relation to
a
itself? Wait, what do you mean?
yeah, it's a relational ontology, um, where basically if something were to change, either temporally, physically, any sort of change would commit it to be also different, and no longer at rest, right? It seems like you have to take different lens to look at things, whether to call them changing or resting, and it depends on how you place them in this sort of relational structure, just like you pointed out earlier. Um, Regardless of whether we define them, right? It doesn't look like the house is moving. So in relation to your perception, the house is at rest. In relation to the solar system, the house is changing, right? It depends on how you relate things for that which is to either be changing or at rest. In this case, that which is the house. But the house is always going to be the same as itself. However, the house is always going to be different than Peter. You see how all five of the kinds that we've discussed play into any one entity?
I understand how they like interact, except for like you said, change and rest don't interact. That they're like mutually
Yes,
exclusive.
change and rest are the one thing that don't interact because
Wait, did you say five? Sorry. Well, hold on. Rewind. I only have four. We
no,
have
you have
change,
five.
rest, that which is, and that which is not. What's the fifth?
Change, rest, that which is the same and the different.
The same. Hold on, I didn't get the same. Okay, hold. I gotta lock in now. Oh, the same is just the thing.
No,
No.
no, no. The same is the relation of the thing to itself.
So okay.
This
What does that
the
mean?
kind that we call the same is always going to be a relational structure. However, everything is the same as itself, right? Peter, you're the same as yourself. I'm the same as myself, but me and you are two different things. So we need a different kind called the same. But we also know that that which is not the same. Um, However, they're two different entities, but we predicate sameness onto that which is, right? Let's take an example. We'll take you as an example one more time. Peter, you
Okay.
are that which is. In
Okay. Yeah, I'm an
relation
example of that.
to this current moment, if you were to stop time, you would be at rest, correct? Or, for example, the name Peter is at rest. The name Peter is not changing, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. The name is not changing. True.
Now, you are currently changing if we relate you to your atomic structure. Your atoms are constantly changing, correct?
Are we talking about my name or me? Okay. Well,
Now
if
we're
we're talking
talking
about
about two
me,
different things because of the relational ontology.
okay.
We can always make you one in many. That was one of the other points that we pointed out earlier, right? Um, so we can talk about your name. We can also talk about you. You right now are resting, right? If you were saying, if we related rest to you sitting in a chair, you would be at rest. If we related you to walking, you would be changing your motions. Depending on what we relate you to, you can either be at change or at rest. The thing specifically is that the change, or that change itself, can never be at rest, and rest itself can never be changing, because then change would be at rest, and rest would be at changing, or in motion, which
Yeah.
is
Okay.
antithetical in virtue of what they are.
Okay.
Um, So remember that first confusion sets that discussion of relationship between being, rest, and motion, right? We noticed that motion and rest both clearly are, each of them equally is. However, it is clear we don't mean that they are both either changing or at rest. And we found ourselves stuck with the third thing, that which is, or being. Being is not at rest nor in motion, but motion and rest both are, which is implying that even though all things which are can be categorized into what is at motion or what is at rest, being or that which is outside both of those categories, right? And that's what introduced us to per se predication, which referred to what is true of a kind in virtue of what it is. Largeness is large per se, or simply because of what it is. Um, and this denial of motion and rest introduced that negative predication. Um, that's why Plato is able to find the valid function of what is not. Um, and then we get that confusion of the late learners that I called earlier, right? We call a man man, and we call the good good. But how can we say that a man is good if good is something different than the man? So the point of this late learner's paradox is that we should only describe a good thing as good, and a man as man. But that seems to be a refusal to admit that one thing can be many and many things can be one. Um, and like we go back to that atom example that I used about you. You are many different atoms, but you still are one Peter. Make sense? Depending on what we relate
I
to.
yeah.
Yeah, depending on what
I
we
I,
relate
I
you to.
understand what you're saying. Sure.
Um,
Like you're saying that like there's different like when we say Peter or when we say Ori, we might mean like the person who has the red shirt on, or we might mean the person who's composed of these atoms in this order, in this like way.
right.
There's like different ways of defining it. Sure, I just I disagree with it, but yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I get the theory. Okay, it's fine.
Um, so if we were to deny predication or forbid communion between different things, um, language would be impossible. Um, so that's why the late learners who only allow self-identity statements um, is wrong. Um, for example, like we said earlier, if motion and rest had no share in being, they wouldn't be at all. Um, if motion and rest can't be instantiated as attributes, there would be nothing that can either move or rest. So we need to be able to allow an interweaving of kinds to allow language and for ontology to also not be self-contradictory. Now, this interweaving of kinds that we've been talking about isn't simple in the sense that it can be done without thought. There are rules that must be followed. Since we are shown that motion and rest can't blend, because what is at rest would be moving and what is moving would be at rest, it needs to be clear that some distinct kinds can blend while others can't. And that's what prompts us for the need of two more kinds, difference and sameness. Um, so in the same way that we introduced motion and rest as categories of being, sameness and difference are also introduced in a similar manner. It's clear that sameness and difference both are, yet being is not sameness, nor is it difference. And we do that dialectical practice once again with motion, rest, difference, and sameness, right? Clearly, motion and rest both participate in sameness and difference, but are neither sameness nor difference. Um, Motion is the same as itself, yet different from rest. The same account goes for rest. Rest is different from motion and the same as itself. Seems to be a bit obvious, but we go even further. Motion is different from being, and rest is different from being. So now we need to understand that nature of the difference. Um, and that's where we call to that per aliud predication, um, which is used when something is in reference to something other than itself. Something is different, or something different is always different per aliud, or it's always different than something other than itself, which makes us commit to the view that difference is always and only said in relation to something else, in contrast to being, which can be used both per se or per aliud, in relation to itself or in relation to other things. So, since this is the case, the different must constitute a different kind, or a kind different from being itself. So, recall that I said earlier motion is different from being, and we'll compare that to the analysis of the concept that motion is also the same per aliud, because motion has the attribute of being the same as itself. But motion is also different, per aliud rather than the same per aliud from the same, because the same is only the same as itself per se, and these two kinds are non-identical. So we may now put these claims in terms of not being per se. Motion is not being the same, while the same is being the same. So every form is per aliud the same. In relation to another, it is the same, but is per se different than the same. We predicate everything with sameness, knowing it's different than the kind that we call the same. What are we thinking?
I don't like it.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, I don't like that he's avoiding giving a definition to change and rest. At least that's what it feels like. Because we're just presupposing that they exist. Like that
Well,
they're two. Like, no.
I feel
Go ahead.
like in the I don't know which one, books 5 to 7 of the Republic, he gives a pretty good identification of what he would be meaning by these terms. I feel like that could help give you a sense. I don't know if it wouldn't be in this text, but I feel like or also just from the context of like the pre-Socratics, like Ori mentioned, Heraclitus or Parmenides, you kind of get more of a sense of what like the juxtaposition he's putting. Or also the earlier section on the Battle of the Giants. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't think it's like undefined.
Like, how would you define the way he uses change and rest?
Um. Well, I guess if he's opposing it to the forms, right? The forms, in this sense, the rest would be this unchanging thing. That would be immutable. So, like for example, I don't know a good example. Like, just use Plato's theories of form. There's like justice, right? And I guess there's this like intellectual form, justice, and it'll never change. Whereas if you could say there's like this particular instantiation of justice at like X time in this social world, it's in motion. It's mutable. It can change. Like for example, somebody else could come into government and put a different formation in.
Yeah,
And now the
no, that
state of
makes
affairs would be
sense.
different. So, like, I guess as I've understood it, rest would be referring to this something that's immutable, which is why why like, or I think is why Ori was identifying it as like this idealist position in which the forms are these intellectual things, right? That's why they're immutable. It could kind of go with what he was referring to with the same, right? You see how the same, so this kind of like identity relation that could never change, could never be not in this sense. Like justice can never not be justice. The idea of justice wouldn't be not justice; it would never change. And likewise, like particular instantiations would they can there could be a like you could see somebody could have a beard one day and it's mutable. They could shave again. I don't know. Maybe that's a
So
picture. I don't know
that
if
makes
that's a mistake.
sense. That makes a lot of sense. So you're saying like things that are in motion or changing are necessarily not forms, but all things that are forms are at rest.
Take away
Um,
this idea of forms, right? Anytime I said forms, just instead replace the word kind.
Fine, sure. Okay. Either way, my point is like I would agree with what he's saying, if the only things that are at rest are like abstract ideas and like nothing in the world is changing. But if we're going to talk about like things that are in the world and decide whether they're at rest or they're changing, I feel like we necessarily either need to presuppose a frame of reference or are just using bad methods of like getting to a definition of those things.
Yeah, it's
But
possible.
what you said makes sense.
But
Yeah,
isn't it
what you said makes sense. As
isn't
like things
it
that aren't changing are at rest. Yeah.
but isn't that opposite to what you just said earlier when you said that, the house is at rest? I don't see it moving. It's at rest in relation to something, right? That's Plato's entire point here, that our ontology of these kinds must be relational. Um, right.
Is that what is he saying that like when we define change and rest, it's always going to be up to our perception, and that
Not up
like a
to our
house can be.
perception, but up to how we relate it to other kinds.
What do you mean? Like for the house, give the house example. Like if we're relating it to me, then it's not changing. But if we're relating it to like Mars, then it seems like it's changing.
Yeah, if we relate it to physical movement, um, then it is changing, absolutely, right? I mean, even the wood used in building the house is constantly aging, and that's a temporal
Okay.
change. But if we relate it to your perception and where you're standing, you're not seeing the house change, right?
But then by that logic, like nothing can be intrinsically at rest. At least no physical object.
Yeah, no physical object would be intrinsically at rest. It depends on what we're relating it to, right? But what is at rest is that house will always be the same as itself. It will never change and not be what it is, correct? Not in a sort of ship
Like
of Theseus way.
what if I break it?
Right, but it would. I'm talking about the kind houses, for example, or
Yeah,
house. The kind house.
like the abstract idea, the universal
Sure.
of house.
You could call it the universal. You could call it um, a theoretical house, whatever we want to call it. It will also participate in rest, because if it would participate in change, it would no longer be the same as itself.
Yeah,
Temporally, not to be the same as itself would make complete sense. But when you take um, a more so theoretical standpoint, pausing something for a second, we wouldn't be able to attribute change to it, right?
okay. I don't know how this like interacts with like okay. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. I feel like I have a better understanding of it now. That said, I don't know how any of this addresses materialism or idealism. I guess that's my missing connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that this just comes from last week's lecture. Um, but for example, if I were to just kind of give it to you for a small um second, we'd have to remember that um the materialists insist that only bodies are real, and that what is invisible or incorporeal is equal to reality, and capacity is only limited to physical properties. While the idealist would insist that true being is eternal, unchanging, and that true being undergoes change would be denied as a statement. Um, but Plato here is combining that. We're not saying that what is changing isn't actually that which is, and we're not saying that that which is only limited to physical properties, which would only be changing, correct? We agreed to that earlier. That physical properties, in light of just a temporal difference, are constantly changing. Um, so we admit that being can either be stable or changing, as long as we give it that relational capacity. And that's what Plato did in this section, showed us that relational ontology. Does that make a bit more sense in context?
Yes, I just would a materialist really say that? Would a materialist really say that like even in relation to me, things are not at rest. That like the house over there, even in relation to me, it's not at rest. It's still moving.
Um, yeah, no, absolutely. That's kind of the but the biggest thing that they would say is that reality is what is tangible. Now, is rest itself tangible, or is the idea of sameness and of difference tangible?
Probably not. When
So
you say
that's
tangible, you just mean like physical, right? Like you just mean
yes,
like it's a thing. Yeah.
exactly. So if
Okay.
that's the big thing that we're going against with the materialists, right? They're denying any reality to it. But earlier we said that we can't deny reality to it, because then nothing would be the same as itself and everything would be chaotic. And we also can't allow full blending. Everything has to be in some way different than something else so we can make distinctions for our ontology. That's what we're going against on the materialist end, on top of the idea that everything is constantly changing. Going against the idea that everything constantly is changing is more so going against the Heraclitean ontology, while going against um, Parmenides would be basically showing that we can speak of what is not, or that which is not, insofar as we redefine that which is not as something that isn't strictly non-existence, but is something that is um, negation of identity and negative ordinary predication. That which is not is something that is just something different than a specific entity, right?
No, I got that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
That makes sense.
that's how the materialists and the forms and the idealists and Heraclitus and Parmenides play into this, which we went over last week. Um,
Okay.
yeah, Plato, what he did in this dialogue was very much a big portion of the dialogue is setting the stage up for this week. So you kind of jumped right into the mix. You kind of jumped in to the weirdest part of Plato. um,
But so Plato would say that these things that we're talking about, that which is not, the different sameness, these are things that exist outside of humans. Like if humans were gone, these things would still exist in the world.
yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think Plato ever had a um, wanted to commit himself to this idea of mental representation and indirect realism, right? Or anything of that sort. That would be a bit anachronistic of us to, um, say. This is just basically his ontology towards the end of his life, um, rather than, he's not really making a statement about perception here. Um, he's just making a statement of the way things that are, the way things that are exist. Um,
Okay, that's fine. I still, because you said earlier that things cannot be like intrinsically or like absolutely at rest, because they would only ever be at rest in relation to. I feel like when you use the word like in relation to, it implies perception. No, but
it doesn't have
it's
to.
fine otherwise.
I don't need to
What do you mean?
perceive um, that Peter is the same as himself. That's something that's analytical. I don't need to perceive.
But that's because you defined it that way. Like everything is the same as itself. Like you can deduce that. You don't need
Well, yeah,
induction for that.
it's true in
That's
virtue
like a
of the kind.
rationalist. Yeah. Like you that's like a priori is
No,
like
no, not a
all things
priori.
are.
I wouldn't be able to
How
have
would that not
knowledge of
be?
Peter without experience of Peter, correct?
Well, true. Okay. If you agree that like Peter is something that which is some, if Peter's a thing within that which is, um then you know that the sameness principle applies, that it is the same as itself.
Right.
Okay. I feel like this is just deduction.
Part of it for
I
sure.
don't.
Um, let's take the example of not large. In assuming that the
Okay.
small is contrary to the large, um, then Plato kind of tells us in the text that we're not actually speaking of the small rather than the equal when we say the not big or the not large. We're only saying something different from what is big. Um,
Yeah,
so,
like something can be a medium-sized shirt, even if
or
it's
not
not
even that.
large.
Not even that. When I say not Peter, I'm not talking like I'm not giving priority to Ori or Cooper, right? Because when I say not Peter, it can be either Ori or Cooper or Reyna or any one of us. Um, all we're saying is when we say not Peter is something different from Peter. We're not actually giving a direct statement to something. Does that make sense? Um,
Yeah, I get all this. That's fine. But I feel like he's just defined the words so that they're just true in this way. Like I don't like because is there something in the world that shows the category of that which is and that which is not, or like change and rest and pushes him to define it in this way, or is he just doing that?
I um
Like I feel like he's just making these categories and then seeing how the categories interact, rather than like these categories objectively existing outside of the mind.
well, it's just an
But I mean,
interrelation, a complex interrelation between um things that are. I mean, we wouldn't ever deny that things exist, correct?
yeah, yeah,
And we wouldn't ever deny analytic truths about those things, right? We would never deny that those things that are the same things as the things that are. But we would never deny that one of the things that are is different than a different one of those things that are. It's just it's in the name. Um, so everything here is just analyzing that complex interrelation of structures within our ontology, right? Regardless of um, strict definitions, it just comes from a strict analysis between different kinds. Um, for example, or maybe not for example, but the use of is not, in which x can be said to be not y if x is different from what is y, where both the form of y-ness um, and whatever participates in this form count as something that is y, is what makes it unproblematic to state x is something that is not, in its not being y. And finally, if x is not y, y-ness can be said to be without reference to x, which can be translated to say y-ness is different from what is with reference to x. Um, so that idea of participation and reference are very crucial parts in understanding the account that we're given here today. So if you take one thing from today, it should be um, that when we predicate something, it must be a participating entity of all things that are in reference to the specific subject. Um, right, for us to be able to predicate motion of something, it must be a participant. Um, a, it must be participating in the set of things that reference that something. If we are to predicate Peter with motion, motion must be like referenced to Peter in the world, in a sort of cosmology or in an ontology. Um, does that make any more sense?
it makes sense. Yeah,
All right. Well,
I don't have like I think I understand what you're saying.
at the very least,
I just yeah.
um, as long as we get also that these kinds aren't fully sufficient, um, these kinds are just the 5 great kinds, then I'll be happy with today. But anyways, at this point, I will be ending the recording. It's been about an hour 15. For anybody who got through the recording this far, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed. And we'll be back next week to end off the dialogue.